Welcome back to Native Speaker. We're going to look at the qualifying cousins now in the but family. These include albeit, even though, even if, although, and though. The role of the qualifying cousins is very simple. They qualify a statement by saying that there is a minor opposite counterpoint. So if you say something positive, when you use albeit or one of these cousins, we know that the next point is smaller or minor. Let's have a look at some examples. Here we can see the structure of your main point at the beginning in position 1 and then your counterpoint in position 3. This is your minor point, and in the middle we'll have the link phrase, and we'll start with the phrase albeit. Albeit will work more with a comma, and it's possible for a semicolon or a dash, but your comma is the most common punctuation point that you'll see with albeit. The space between position 2 and 3 will not use any form of punctuation. It will connect straight through. You will not use a full stop between position 1 and albeit. The word albeit comes from the phrase although it be that, and this is an old phrase that was used many years ago but is not used in modern English. I'd like to thank John for joining us, albeit a little late. This sentence is 80% positive, thanking John, and 20% negative, he was a little late. So you can see here what I mean by this. Mostly the first phrase before the albeit is the main point, and the phrase after albeit is the minor point. In this case, it's 80% positive and 20% negative. I've used 80% and 20% just as a visualization aid for you. There's no grammar definition that's giving this percentage. I'm just doing that to help us all understand easily. Our broadband is pretty expensive, albeit very fast. So in this case, I've put the negative first. I don't think this is that common, but it is of course possible. There's no reason why you can't. So it's 80% negative and 20% positive. The weather has been wonderful recently, albeit in the middle of the lockdown. So we had wonderful weather during the lockdown of 2020 of the COVID-19 crisis, and the main point of this sentence is the weather has been wonderful. The 20% subclause is that it was in the middle of the lockdown when we couldn't go to the beach. That was the negative part. This electric car is really cool, albeit a little pricey. So the main point here is that the electric car is really cool. That's what we want to focus on. And we're adding that there is a slightly negative aspect in that it's a little pricey. Pricey is another word for expensive. It's very popular with native speakers. I said I'd put that in here. Students don't use that word enough, and it's really good when you're out and about and you say, I don't go into that shop, it's pretty pricey, or I've never eaten in that restaurant, it's kind of pricey. So it's kind of a nice word. We use it quite a bit. The government has introduced a strict, albeit necessary, new quarantine regime. So here the 80% focus of the sentence is that this is strict. The 20% focus is that it is necessary. But our main point is that it's strict. So a new quarantine regime. So again, reference to the COVID lockdown. This quarantine is when we can't meet other people and we have to stay locked away. And regime is a very popular word that means a system of doing something. Usually it suggests a lot of discipline and being strict. So for example, you could have a fitness regime. If you have a system for staying in shape, like going to the gym every day at 6 a.m. and going for a swim every second evening, that's a regime. Regime has a strange pronunciation. It's not regime, as a lot of students say, it's regime. 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 So that's often used for governments when you're being critical of them. If you think a government is too strict or wasn't elected properly and you don't like that government, then you'll see that in the newspapers and on the radio, and you know that the people speaking or writing don't like the government they're talking about. Obviously the people in the government who's been spoken about won't like that. We have really high-speed Wi-Fi, albeit pretty dear. So the main point here is this: the Wi-Fi is high speed. That's the main focus of the sentence, And the negative focus, which isn't as important, is that it's pretty dear. Dear is another word for expensive that you'll hear out and about from people, mostly conversational. You're used to dear as in dear sir, madam, or dear John, but dear can also mean that something is expensive. Having kids at home all day can be a challenging, albeit rather enjoyable experience. So the main focus here is that having kids around the house can be 80% negative. But of course we love our kids, so 20% of the sentence is positive. In many of these cases, the sentence is saying that everything is fine apart from one small detail, and that's what albeit suggests. You'll notice that the counterpoint made in position 3 does not have a subject-verb-object structure. If you pay close attention, you'll see that the most comfortable fit is an adverb or qualifier plus an adjective. Example, a little late, somewhat expensive, pretty fast, and quite enjoyable, as you can see here in all of the various examples. It is quite common to use maybe just an adverb here sometimes, or an adverb and an adjective, or a qualifier and an adjective. And if you want, there might be more in the sentence, like a noun here of the lockdown, or a new quarantine regime, or experience. So that can be used also, and it's not that unusual. Though I have to say, in most sentences you'll come across these kind of sentences with albeit, especially in position 3, they tend to be short and sweet. Okay, short and sweet. They don't go into too much detail, but of course you can find examples that are different. A common mistake made by a lot of students is that they add a subject and a verb here after albeit, and this is a big mistake. This is a big no-no. Okay, I'd like to thank John for joining us, albeit he is a little late. No. The weather has been wonderful recently, albeit it's in the middle of the lockdown. Oh dear. No. We have really high-speed Wi-Fi, albeit it is pretty dear. No, that is a mistake. The it in albeit is really the pronoun and the noun included, so you don't need it, and we don't use a verb after albeit like that. It's better just to go with the adverb or adjective that I was showing you. So avoid this mistake. It's pretty common among students, and we'll get rid of that. Okay, so that's the main point, the link phrase, and the counterpoint all in one. We said albeit is from the but family, and it has some brothers in this family. Let's replace albeit with its brothers although, even though, even if, and though. They have the same meaning, but we may have to change the construction a little in some of the cases. So you'll find that albeit is very clear in the way we use it in terms of construction, but these guys, there's a little bit of a grey area. It's not quite as black and white. Some of these work better with the subject-verb-object or subject-verb-adjective combination, like he's a little late, it is somewhat expensive, and it can be quite enjoyable. Let's change albeit for some of its brothers from that group, although, even though, even if, and though. So if we said, for example, I'd like to thank John for joining us, although a little late, that doesn't read so well. The weather has been wonderful recently, even if in the middle of the lockdown. Oh no, that doesn't read so well. This electric car is really cool, although rather expensive. Well, that's possible. You can say that, but we could add more here if we wanted to. The government has introduced a strict, though necessary, quarantine regime. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong there. But look here, there is high-speed internet in my location, even if pretty dear. No, that doesn't read well. Having kids at home can be difficult, even though quite enjoyable. No, that doesn't read well. So what can we do to fix this counterpoint section? Well, very simple. He is a little late. So I'd like to thank John for joining us, although he is a little late. There is a great new satellite broadband solution coming out in the future, even though somewhat expensive. No, even though it is somewhat expensive. Now it's correct. The weather has been wonderful recently, even if in the middle of the lockdown. Okay, so even if it's in the middle of the lockdown. Here, rather expensive will be okay. This electric car is really cool, although rather expensive. That'll work. There's no problem there. You can, if you want, say it's rather expensive or it's rather pricey. Don't forget that word I just told you about, another word for expensive. The government has introduced a strict, though necessary, quarantine regime. And here you'll notice that there is a comma. I told you that there's no comma between position 2 and position 3, but there can be a comma or a dash or, inside the counterpoint. And this is when it's what we call a non-defining relative clause. This clause means that it's comma, comma here, and it means that if we took out though necessary, most of the sentence would still hold its original meaning. So that one, it's the same really, there's no change. There is high-speed internet in my location, even if pretty dear. Even if it's pretty dear, now it'll work. Having kids at home can be difficult, even though it can be quite enjoyable, and now these will work. So as you can see, most of them, they will use a subject and a verb, like a pronoun and a verb, or a noun and a verb. And one or two of them, sometimes, especially if we're talking about these non-defining clauses, then they might not. Okay, so it's not quite as black and white as albeit. Quick recap on the qualifying cousins. Albeit is more common when you say something positive and then add that there is a small negative. Now, there's no reason why it has to be like this, but you'll notice when you find examples on the internet or in texts or online that it often is like this. And you'll see in some of my examples, I put in the alternate versions. I put in, sometimes it was positive first and negative second, but most of them were and then sometimes negative first and positive second. But most of the time you'll notice that for some reason the positive tends to come first. There's no reason why it has to be like that, but it often is like that. It's okay. So it's possible to come across it the other way around, but it's not as common. Although, even though, even if, and though can use the positive or negative either side, but my advice is go with a positive link and negative and you'll be fine. Now, of course, if you need to put the negative, that's fine, put the negative first. But if you have a choice, I would say go with what's more common. Albeit works better without a subject verb object or a subject verb adjective, and it works better with an adverb or an adjective or an adverb and adjective together. For example, it's a nice day today, albeit a tad breezy. Now, I decided to include this word here in the text so that you could see this new word, a tad, which is really, really good. It's a word that means a little bit too. So breezy, of course, means a gentle wind. And if you're outside having dinner on the patio and there was a nice breeze, but then it got a little bit too breezy, you could say it's a tad breezy. If you're eating dinner and there was too much salt or spice, you could say it's a tad salty. It's a tad spicy. If you go to the movies and a film is too long, then you could say it was a tad long. Okay, it's a bit diplomatic as well, so there's a little bit of sugar in here. So I just said I'd include that extra. So that's the recap on the qualifying cousins. You need to get some practice now and start using those in the way I showed you. If you'd like to join one of our online courses that include live interactive lessons, online tests and feedback, just drop us a line on info@nativespeaker.ie and we'd be more than happy to sort you out. If you find these videos helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. That's all from me. Very best of luck, and we'll see you all next time.